We will hear argument this morning in case 2512.
Grievances we could go into with this system. I think we could be here for hours.
National Collegiate Athletic Association.
I think we have some proof, even a few years into NIL now, that people care about the logo.
There are too many people in power who have no desire to give up that power.
The NCAA's ever-shifting decisions, not stable decisions.
Does the concept of amateurism in college athletics even matter anymore?
They've capped it again without any sort of collective bargaining.
We'll finish with our unilateral decision.
Hey everyone, we're back for one more remote session of Unilateral Decisions before we get back in the studio next week with a special guest. But today we're talking something that we've been talking about the last couple weeks, and 2 weeks ago we mentioned the 5 years to play 5 seasons comes through the NCAA, and we knew there was going to be fallout to it. But Sam, what has that fallout been, particularly for that 2022 class that wasn't expecting to be eligible, but now they are?
Well, a lot. A whole lot. We still don't have a decision. I think what the entire college sports world is waiting for right now, especially if you look at my mentions on Twitter, is a decision on the 10th Circuit is currently looking at whether to issue a stay, as the NCAA has requested, in the Wisney federal Colorado case. We still don't have a decision on that. I've been spending just about all my research money on those 10 cents peso refreshes, and still nothing. Checked right before this podcast, and yeah, it may very well be something where we get a decision by the time this podcast comes out. It could be something where we're still waiting, but that is going to be a pretty monumental decision. But at the same time, we're kind of in a situation where a lot of players are seeking kind of an extra layer of protection. I think is the best way to phrase it. So, along with kind of this federal class action lawsuit, this antitrust lawsuit, you have a lot of lawsuits filed by sometimes individual players, sometimes groups of players. You had a group of more than 70 athletes in California who were able to get a temporary restraining order. That hearing is going to be set for a couple of weeks. Just all these different state court cases, a lot of them contract cases, some of them state antitrust cases that are, again, kind of looking for that extra layer of protection, though a lot of them are kind of targeting kind of one of the weaknesses of the Wisney injunction, kind of the parts of the Wisney injunction that, isn't quite clear, at least as of yet. The plaintiffs have filed a motion for clarification, but we're not quite there yet. And that is the idea that the Wisney injunction, this Colorado federal injunction, does not give athletes the ability to transfer if they are not already part of the transfer portal. And that is something that has led to, a lot of these lawsuits have been able to, secure, extra transfer portal periods or, orders that the NCAA cannot punish athletes who did not enter the portal. And we've even seen one, lawsuit filed last night, a women's basketball player who actually filed a lawsuit against the NCAA specifically against the 15-day transfer portal period. So that's definitely something to watch.
We'll get into more with Kyla Deck in just a bit, but we've seen a few of these athletes, Arizona, Florida A&M, Indiana, a few here and there have come back to play. A few might be undecided. But Joe, from a team standpoint, how do you integrate these players that are showing up the final week of fall camp, and is it realistic to expect them to be a big part of any teams moving forward?
Carefully. There's so much going on with these, cases. You don't know. You really don't know if these guys are going to be eligible for competition. But from a, can you help perspective, I think that's case by case. I think a couple of weeks ago, I gave the example of the offensive linemen that as soon as their careers are over, they seemingly drop 200 pounds. But there are guys that have been working out because they were in NFL mini camps, or they're guys that are working out that were trying to get to the next level. So for anybody that's got a 5th year left, and we saw, something coming out of Louisiana today, and I'm sure we'll get into that. There are guys that are in shape. There are guys that can help. And then there are guys that are going to take a little bit of time to get back into it. But if they've been a part of your program for 4 years, they know the staff, they know the culture. Even just having some of those guys around might have, a lot of merit and a lot of positivity for a program.
and this is not athletics related, but as we've talked about, college athletics is big business right now. It's a multi-billion dollar industry. So for other entities like a trading card company, I'm curious, Mike, from your perspective, you look at someone like Stephen Daly with Indiana, who came back because of this injunction, a guy who led the Big Ten in tackles for loss. He's not a part of any plans from marketing companies, agencies to put out content and collectibles. Now he becomes potentially a big piece of the puzzle. So how do those entities that are around college athletics reform discussions over, in your case, trading cards for these players that are impact players that are coming back?
Yeah, there's not a one size fits all answer. There's certainly different things that go into the different considerations. For us in particular, in a trading card environment, there's a lot of pre work that has to happen. And generally, these rosters are identified by July 1st is kind of the date that we all put in place to say, we've got so much work to do from a manufacturing standpoint. There's a lot of time that goes into digital printing, curing time and cutting time and trimming time and collating and mixing and foiling. And even just the thing of like in a retail environment, it takes a week plus just to get something, a finished product, onto a shelf somewhere. And so it's difficult, and you've got to kind of figure out what are the things you're going to hold yourself true to and what's important to you. We've tried to insulate ourselves a little bit around like, having plans for additional programming and sets for trading cards later in the year. I think where you see a lot of the places that succeed in the NIL space is the ones that can operate in a hot market. And this is part of the reason for it. I mean, you've never seen it quite like this, but a hot market apparel opportunity has a lot more legs than somebody who has to know 6 months in advance what they're creating, a la a bobblehead or something in that nature. And so it is one of the reasons. Again, this is like a crazy example, all things considered, but it is one of the reasons that the NIL market has not completely exploded. It's the reason that like standard school issued apparel is still going to be more popular than the apparel with somebody's name and picture on it, because there's just not the shelf life. And you have to turn these things so fast. It is one of the hindrances to the NIL ecosystem, but there are deliverables and assets that can be turned around really quickly, and those things can take great advantage of an opportunity like this, where Indiana's got a great player coming back from a national championship team that you can take advantage of, whether that be digital content, hot market apparel, things like that. There are ways, and there are industries and assets that can take advantage of that. Trading cards are a more difficult one in order to do that. Apparel in general is more difficult to do it at scale, something that's going to be on retail shelves and you're going to be able to really, hit a bunch of home runs on, because the lead time isn't there. But it is kind of a little sliver of why the NIL market is still sort of kind of chugging along, trying to find its traction in some of these things, because there's so much change. There's so much turnover. There's so many things that are hard to get going when you've got an NFL roster that, by and large, at least the people that are going to drive the market, years in advance for the most part, where they're going to be, and you can really set a plan in place. And even then, it's fast for some of these apparel companies to be able to get things spun up. So, yeah, it's a challenge, not a new challenge necessarily, just new wrinkle. And you just got to do the best with what you have.
Joe mentioned this a minute ago, but Pete Thamel comes out, reports a judge in Louisiana has granted a group that includes 16 football players, including several in NFL training camps over the summer, a restraining order that allows them to return to college football. Sam, I know you've read all the documents. I have not. What do we take away from that judge's ruling?
I think we take away from this judge's ruling the same that we're taking away from a lot of these different rulings, which is that this is a really terrible fact pattern for the NCAA. Judges are being very, very clear their opinion that what the NCAA has done to these athletes is profoundly unfair, and that the NCAA made a really, really bad mistake in not just simply, and I'm using simply in some quotation marks because I know it's more complicated than that, in not kind of just grandfathering in them, or at least, making them eligible under this new rule set, because, they're looking at these athletes who just graduated, who, if the rules were applied to them without any kind of like special grandfathering or any kind of special, like, you get an extra year of eligibility, these are all players who would be eligible this season because they would have that 5th year. And, for all the people who are saying, well, wouldn't that, just lead the class of 2021 athletes to file similar lawsuits? And the answer is no, because, they're not within that 5-year time frame. This is why the class of 2022 is so special right now. It's because they are within that 5-year time frame, and I think judges are finding it incredibly easy to grant TROs and preliminary injunctions. And there's a reason why this has been unanimous. There's a reason why judges have been not only willing to grant eligibility in these cases, as they did in like the Wisney case, but also, Louisiana, I think, is kind of a perfect example, goes so much further beyond that, where the order in Louisiana, for one, makes it clear that the NCAA has to, as of the date of the order, so right now, has to reopen the transfer portal specifically for these athletes, which is not the first time a judge has ordered the NCAA to do that, which is, again, something that is quite disruptive, quite kind of crazy from an administrative standpoint. But also, the judge has also said, and Joe, you mentioned a lot of these players are, we're in NFL training camps, and we're, already kind of past that threshold that we've traditionally seen as, like, once you pass this threshold, you are no longer an amateur collegiate athlete. Not that amateurism is really a thing anymore. But he's ordered, the NCAA to go to court to prove individually why each individual athlete should not be eligible beyond just this kind of 2022 ruling, and he's going to make a decision based on that. And it's really just the kind of this very extraordinary loss of power for the NCAA. It's judicialization. It is the judges kind of taking over governance of the NCAA, and a situation where the NCAA really brought it on themselves. I mean, we talk about, these local hometown judges and all that, but we've seen injunctions in California, in Louisiana, in Ohio, and Georgia, and Tennessee, and New Jersey, and Michigan, and just all these different places where, you can't really say it's just hometown judge bias. It's just the NCAA is breaking the law. And I think that much is really clear right now.
Well, the headline is going to be that these guys were in NFL camps. That should make them, not part of this classification, but they thought they'd exhausted their eligibility. They might not have gone to the pros. I mean, they might have stuck around for a 5th year had they known that was something that was going to be coming their way. So these are, interesting one-offs.
And that's a really important point right there, and it's something that judges are seeing as part of this conversation, where, yes, under the NCAA rules, under different NCAA rules, these are professional players now. They've signed NFL contracts, even just to play in minicamp, and that under NCAA rules makes them ineligible. But the judges looking back and saying, well, just like you said, Joe, if they had not, or if they had known they were going to be able to get this extra year, if the NCAA had decided back in June, or not even in June, I mean, they've been deliberating these rules for such a long time. If they had, made this decision back in January, for one, it wouldn't have been nearly as disruptive because there would have been a whole lot of lead time to be able to make these changes, make these adjustments. But also for two, these players would never have gone to the NFL. They wouldn't have gone to minicamp because they wouldn't want it to. And that's not necessarily always true. I mean, some of these athletes may have said, okay, 4 years is enough. I want to try my luck in the NFL. But then it becomes a whole lot harder for them to kind of turn around and say, well, wait a minute, I actually want to go back to school because, the NFL minicamp stuff isn't really cutting it. It just becomes a much, much harder argument to make. And like this is something I just keep coming back to with, the professional rules and with the transfer rules. The NCAA is really stress testing its rulebook in a very awkward situation for them because this is such a bad fact pattern. And it's a situation where the NCAA is being forced to defend these rules that would otherwise be perfectly defensible in context where the cards are stacked against them, where the judges are already really not happy with the way they're doing things. And that is not the position you want to be in. I mean, I wrote an article for Hoops HQ a few weeks ago where really the summation of all of it was bad facts make bad law, and these are horrible facts for the NCAA.
I have a couple follow-up questions for you, Sam, on this, specifically around the ruling, the appeal ruling in the 10th Circuit that we think we may be hearing, and by the time this is out, we may have found, but more in like dialing it down, layman's terms, trying to understand really like what's going on here. Can you first back up and help me understand why the word stay and what it means in judicial language? Help me understand that terminology before I go on to my next question.
Sure, yeah. A stay is essentially pushing the pause button. It is saying, we have this injunction. This injunction was granted by the lower court. We are going to pause this injunction. We're going to stop this injunction from taking effect until we can decide the full issue on appeal. That's what just happened in Ohio, for example, where the original 5-for-5 case that was filed in Ohio, Judge Wagner issued this order. The order came out, the injunction came out, and the Ohio Court of Appeals on Monday said, well, wait a minute, we have some concerns about this. We're not really sure that the injunction was properly granted, so we're going to reduce, or we're going to kind of stop it from taking effect until we can review the full case on the merits. And that's exactly the same exact thing that the 10th Circuit's currently deliberating is, do we have enough information that the injunction was probably granted correctly, or is it something where we need to stop it from happening to avoid harm to the defendants while we figure out whether the injunction was actually properly granted on the merits?
Okay, so that was my next follow-up question, is this concept of irreparable harm, whether or not, like, we've talked about it before in a number of different lawsuits that have come up over the time that we've been doing this podcast, that oftentimes that is why an injunction will be not only granted, but also allowed to carry forward, is that if it weren't, and the case were to go full throttle, and it came back in this case, the plaintiff's favor, that they still wouldn't be able to recapture the harm that was done to them, the damages that they had by not, getting to do so in a timely fashion. How much of that is what's being considered by the 10th Circuit with regard to this appeal versus the way, like, is it the same consideration that the injunction was being considered if this irreparable harm concept, or is there something more that the appeal process has to consider beyond that?
It's very, very similar, and to not kind of overcomplicate things, we can say that it's substantially similar enough to say that they are similar. But the two biggest factors that the appellate courts are going to look at here are likelihood of success on the merits, which again is the same thing that they're doing for the injunction. Like, how likely is it, without having gone through the entire trial process, how likely is it the plaintiffs are actually going to succeed? And then, yes, that irreparable harm element, and really, even more so, balance of equities, where you're saying, what is the potential harm to the plaintiffs? Is it something that can be, is it something that is irreparable? Just like you said, Mike, is it something that, we could go back and give them money to kind of make up for it? And in this case, being able to play this extra year of sports is generally considered to be irreparable harm. But also, what is the public interest here? Is the public interest served by the injunction? Is it something where, it's kind of for the public good to kind of stop the defendant's bad conduct here, or it's also going to be something where, a lot of times you're also going to consider, is the injunction actually doing something that's changing the status quo? Or is it something where you're stopping the defendant from doing something that would change the status quo? And that's also a subject of debate for these injunctions as well. But when you have an injunction that does change the status quo, it becomes a lot harder for that injunction to be granted.
How do you determine that when the thing that is being sued was a change to the status quo?
It's a good question, and it's one that, like, Judge Sweeney in the Wisney case actually specifically punted on this question of whether it's a status quo changing injunction, because she ultimately found it didn't matter, like, regardless of, even with this heightened standard for status quo. But I've seen arguments both ways. I've seen plaintiffs make arguments that, hey, the status quo is that we would be eligible, but for this NCAA decision. The NCAA decision is the thing that is stopping these players from being able to play. Well, the NCAA is saying, actually the status quo is based on our determination of the rules, based on our promulgation of these rules, these players would not be eligible. So, judges have gone a little bit back and forth on whether they find that it actually is a status quo kind of injunction, but it's also something that most of these judges have just found just doesn't matter.
Fascinating.
Joe, you look like you're pondering. Do you have thoughts you want to add to this?
My head's going back to the women's basketball case, though, in this 15-day transfer window. I mean, I'm just every angle of this is a lawsuit. I think I mentioned it a couple weeks ago. Like, if you go back to your question, Dom, at the very beginning about guys who might not be in shape. Like I said, I think I said this 2 weeks ago, but if I'm somebody who's not in shape because I thought I wasn't going to be granted a 5th year of eligibility, I might go back to training again and file a lawsuit so that I'm eligible in 27, 28. Because I'm not going to be ready to go for 26, 27. I use the whole academic year because I don't think the sport matters here. But if I don't think I'm going to be able to compete, I might be filing a lawsuit for next year because I should have gotten my 5th year, but the timing of this, completely put me out.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me to see a lawsuit like that. I think it would be a little more difficult. I think one of the really kind of unique aspects of what we're dealing with right now with these Class of 22 players is really what I talked about before, is that but for the NCAA's decision to exclude them from this new rule, they would be eligible this year. And I think it would be kind of a tougher case to say, well, let me take a year off and then I could play next year as kind of a substitute for that, because it's something where, well, no, you wouldn't be eligible for that next year. Landscape, I could see a plaintiff filing a lawsuit, and I could also see a court granting it. So
it's just like the women's basketball player. Like, had I known I was going to be eligible to transfer, like I would have put my name in the transfer portal. And now, if I've learned anything from you, it's everything can be litigated, and chances are pretty good that the NCAA is going to lose. So if this came down so late and I can't get myself back, into a healthy situation, like to come back for my 5th year now is going to be dangerous.
Yeah, and for our audience, since we haven't really fully dived into this Kyla Deck lawsuit yet, women's basketball player, she is part of the Wisney class. So she played 4 seasons, 4 years, finished those 4 years in spring of 2026. So she's eligible right now under the Colorado federal lawsuit, the Wisney injunction, to play moving forward, to play in 26, 27. But, her team from last year, SMU, has told her that she's not, going to have a spot on the team. So she says, okay, well, I want to transfer, but I didn't really think that I would be eligible. So I didn't put my name in the transfer portal back in April when I had to. There are a lot of athletes who were proactive about that, did do that, kind of anticipating that they may be able to get an extra year, but a whole lot of athletes who did not. And they're kind of in this weird kind of situation where they only have one team because of the way that Judge Sweeney's injunction was stylized. They only have one team to go back to. And if that team says no, they don't have another option. So I really thought it was only a matter of time since a lawsuit like this would get filed. And it got filed.
She's probably going to win.
I think there's a decent chance of it.
Well, let's dive into why she's going to win, because I think we've talked about it a little bit before about it didn't even necessarily need to take this 5-5 situation
100%.
for the portal period to be challenged
100%.
as being, illegal or whatever, unconstitutional, whatever it may be. So we've talked about it, I think, at a higher level. Sam, what are the granular details about why that is the case? Like, take the 5-5 thing. Maybe you could divide it in two. Why does she have a case because of the 5-5? You just talked about it. Why is this maybe something that would lead to precedents outside of the 5-5, and this whole 15-day transfer portal period is in question entirely?
Because it's a restraint on the labor market, plain and simple. I mean, the NCAA has been losing antitrust case after antitrust case since the Alston decision, and this is just another one of them. I will say it's become significantly more challenging to win an antitrust case since the appellate court decisions in all the eligibility cases, the Verkurian case out of the 7th Circuit, the ELAD case out of the 3rd Circuit, the Robinson case out of the 4th Circuit. Here, this is in the 5th Circuit. It was filed in Texas, which gets a little bit weird because they haven't actually had an opportunity to decide one of these cases yet, so we don't really know what the precedent is. But it is a pretty high standard to be able to actually be able to get an injunction for these antitrust cases now. The Wisney plaintiffs gave a lot of evidence, a lot of economic evidence, a lot of market analysis in their pleadings, and that led Judge Sweeney to be able to issue the ruling that she did. And we'll have to see if this judge feels the same way. And again, like the Sweeney's injunction is being attacked for this exact reason, that it did not meet this very high standard that was set for Curry and Elad and Robinson. And we'll have to see whether this deck lawsuit meets that standard as well. But again, like, the reason why we've been talking about this as a potential, as a possibility, ever since they came out with this, limited transfer portal window rule in the first place, and the ghost transfer rule alongside of it, is because it's a restraint of trade. It is a restraint of the labor market, and the NCAA has been shown, or has really been called out by courts as being a serial antitrust violator. That's why they're trying to get antitrust protection from Congress right now. And again, like, I do think this is a situation where they could lose this lawsuit.
One of the things I find interesting about this particular lawsuit with Kyla Deck is she's not just suing the NCAA, she's also suing her former school in SMU. On what grounds is she suing SMU, and what could they feasibly be liable for when they're not the ones that have made these rulings?
Yeah, I'll be honest, that part of it didn't really seem all that clear to me, like what exactly SMU has to do with it, because, their only decision was not to retain her on a roster spot, and that doesn't violate the injunction, because Judge Sweeney was very clear that teams have the latitude to be able to take these players or not take these players. It's not something where the courts could really just force a school to be able to take a player back. That's beyond what they're willing to do, even if it's something they may have the power to do. And yeah, I didn't really get a feel in this lawsuit about what exactly SMU is being sued for, but I might have just honestly missed something.
Fair. And lastly on this, when we look at all these lawsuits, and we predict them 2 weeks ago when this came through, is this issue isolated to this specific group of 2022 athletes, or do we foresee this becoming a relevant discussion for years to come?
I think yes and no. I think both are kind of accurate, honestly. The class of 2022 fact pattern, it's so unique because it's not something we're going to see again. I mean, the class of 2023, by virtue of being the class of 2023 and by virtue of not exhausting their eligibility last spring, they have the benefit of having this new rule set apply to them. So they're going to get 5 years. So it's not going to be a situation where they're going to go to court and say the NCAA is being unfair because they're not applying these new rules to us, because they very clearly are. But every case sets a precedent. Every case, every case that the NCAA loses puts a dent in their armor, and you can point back to things and say, well, the same kind of analysis applies here as well. I think there are still a lot of question marks about whether the NCAA's new 5-for-5 rule is even sustainable. Age rules get challenged all the time when they're implemented by professional sports leagues. We saw the Claret case back in 2004, where the NFL got sued by Maurice Claret, the Ohio State running back. We remember that Claret lost that case, but we don't always remember why. And we don't always remember that the NFL actually lost at the district court, that Claret actually got an injunction. And the only reason that Claret ended up losing the case was because the Second Circuit found that it was actually part of a bargaining agreement, which still have some thoughts about. It was part of a side letter that wasn't really part of the CBA, but I'm not going to relitigate a 20-year-old case. And more recently, kind of in a similar vein, we had a situation in the National Women's Soccer League where there was a young athlete who was clearly good enough to play. She was getting interest from teams in the league, and the NWSL said, no, we have this age rule that says you have to be at least 18 to play. And the young woman filed a lawsuit, and she won. And she was able to play, I think, at 16 years old, because it was an antitrust violation. And, we're kind of going the opposite direction for the NCAA here, but we've also seen, attacks on age rules in high school as well. It's not always something that you can actually be able to defend, and especially when money's involved, and especially when you're talking about this not only or not just as like, the student and student athlete about being connected to schools, but the more money comes into this, the more it becomes a labor market, the harder it is to defend as not being a labor market.
I smell an AARP sponsorship coming.
Well, that's kind of an interesting part of it because, one thing that I'm kind of playing around with in my own scholarship, and hopefully nobody steals my idea because I actually haven't started writing the article yet, is for this age rule, one thing that we've seen with high school age rules is, when you have a bright line age rule in high school athletic associations, very frequently they get attacked, and sometimes the athletic associations lose the lawsuit because you don't have individualized review, because it violates the Americans with Disabilities Act, because it violates the Rehabilitation Act, because it violates local state law that effectively does the same thing. And what did we just have with the NCAA? They had hardship waivers, they had individualized review, they no longer have individualized review. And that is a potential issue for sure. And something that's already, not only to the ADA, but something that's already been being challenged, by another class action lawsuit that has been refiled in Colorado, the DeJuan Campbell lawsuit.
What else do we need to add to this discussion before we get into our unilateral decision of the day?
Are schools going to be able to build dorms that are considered 25 and over communities?
Good question.
This is, yeah, it's wild. The whole thing about, like, I know you didn't say the word ageism, but that's how I'm hearing it. Of like, that's all right. Yeah, I guess. I guess that is a thing that they should be worried about when everything can be litigated.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if the PCSA passes and we have a situation where the NCAA is found to be a state actor because they're now in active concert with the government, and there's those kind of ties with it. Does the Equal Protection Act or Equal Protection Clause apply? Though I will say, age restrictions under the Equal Protection Clause are generally rational basis, and that's pretty easy to overcome. So
Fair enough.
If
Real
I-
quick before we go unilateral decision, Sam, is the last 2 weeks helping or hurting the likelihood of PCSA passing when Congress comes back?
I think it's helping, just because I think chaos helps because more people want to see something like this pass to kind of get rid of the chaos, to the extent that it actually will get rid of the chaos as a matter of debates. But a lot of people do see the PCSA or coming on board with the PCSA as being kind of a solution to the chaos. So I think it does help. Whether it's enough to actually push it over the finish line, I don't know. I still think there's a lot of politics involved with the PCSA, and a lot of people who want to, a lot of members of Congress who want to, either intentionally or just because they want to kind of push their own political agendas. They want to put their own political agendas into the bill, which I think is going to disrupt things quite a bit. And I also think there's already a pretty sizable resistance against the bill overall, and whether that's mitigated at all by some of the chaos that's moving forward remains to be seen. Though I do find it interesting, and I do want to point this out. And apparently, like I kind of came up with this a few weeks ago, and apparently other people have run with it because Ryan Downton, the attorney for all these athletes, has actually argued this in Kentucky last week. If the PCSA were to pass today, do you know who would be eligible to play? All of the 2022 athletes. Because it does not say moving forward. It says anyone, all athletes get 5 years. And that, includes the athletes who just graduated. Though I don't know if the NCAA would agree with me on that, but that's the plain text of the statute. But yeah, I just find that very funny.
All right. Well, for a unilateral decision of today, put yourself in the headspace of a head coach of a winter or spring sport. You've got 2022 grads that have left your program. You've filled your roster. You have no more roster space. But at least one of those returners says they want to return. How are you dealing with that 2022 class when you don't have a roster space open?
I'll start. I think first and foremost, I don't know. You asked earlier, kind of like thought process on how to handle it, and now you're putting this unilateral decision in front of us. I don't know the last time that we've had precedented times, and so I feel like there's, you just kind of like, I said this a couple weeks ago, like, who are you? Like, what do you stand by? How do you operate? What do you say when you're in front of your team? How do you talk about yourself and your program and the people that you carry along? Like, philosophically, all those things. Like, who are you? And what are the statements that you make? And I think you just have to let that guide you, because there's nothing else to tell you what should or shouldn't be done right now. There's nothing else to tell you the right way. There's no blueprint. There's no, playbook for this. You've got another unprecedented situation in a series of unprecedented situations. And if you have found success, you've done it by leaning on whatever makes you confident in who you are and the way that you operate and the way that you're going to best lead your group of people that are around you. And for me, I just keep coming back to that. I keep coming back to, who are you? What's true and authentic to yourself? And what's that decision you're going to make? And also, like I said a couple weeks ago, I hope that aligns with how the university would operate. I hope that me as the head coach in this scenario is in alignment with the athletic director, the president, the other folks that are important in this decision making process, so that everybody's got each other's back. I hope that's true, but I hope that's true for a lot of reasons, not just because of this decision. But if that's true, then you can lean on who you are, what you're about, and the way that you want to go about things in order to make this decision. And I think from there, there's not, who knows what's going to happen. Like, if your choice, because of who you are and the way you operate, is to bring back any player that you think is going to help you win one extra game this year, then do it. Like, what's telling you not to? There's no back pattern. There's no case law that's telling you that that's a bad decision. Just like if your MO is to get everybody that's a part of your program in the room in April when you start spring conditioning and say, this is our squad, nobody on the outside matters, don't listen to the noise, whatever, then like, why would you break pattern at this point? Because there's nothing that tells you that your method is wrong either. So I think that wherever you've found success, however you hang your hat at night, whatever allows you to go to sleep, and sleep soundly at night, hopefully that's in alignment with the other people that are decision makers on your campus. Just move forward with confidence and do it the same way that you would do it, no matter what the circumstances were surrounding you.
Joe, how about you?
Like a hypothetical team, but I'm gonna give a cop-out answer and say that the team that I am head coach of is likely going to have a student athlete that was not going to be competing for me this year. Whether that is, due to injury or, development, whatever. I'm going to assume that there was a kid on my roster that wasn't going to play this year, and I'm going to unroster, deroster, remove him from the roster, and give that spot up. There's some downstream effects that you're going to have to figure out from there, but the publicity from giving up that roster spot would probably help with some NIL deals to pay scholarship, assuming that kid's on scholarship that's no longer going to be playing this year. There's a lot of ramifications from that decision, but on the team that you've asked me to be head coach of, I'm going to assume that there's a kid that's not going to be playing. So it's going to make it really easy for me to give up a roster spot and get this kid on there.
I did not expect the cop-out answer to be cold-blooded.
Yeah. Sam, are you as ruthless as Joe in your answer?
Well, I do wonder how ruthless it actually is. Like, if you already communicated with that athlete that it's essentially going to be a redshirt year, even if we don't have redshirt years anymore, and you can kind of cut a deal where you find a way to keep the athlete on scholarship. You allow them to still be around the team to a certain extent. I'm not the on the ground person like Mike and Joe have been, and Dami have been as well. So I don't know if any of this is possible. But if there's a way to kind of like soft, add, have a, kind of treat the new roster cap as kind of a soft cap, I think you go for it. But I think generally speaking, I would be against cutting an athlete because you want to add someone in the 22 class, and that is I'm saying that as someone who really really feels for everyone in the 22 class and the chaos that I truly feel the NCAA is the one who kind of created all this by refusing to read the tea leaves and do what they needed to do back in June or even January to make this happen, and do it in a way that's going to be fair to everyone. But with the situation we're in, I don't think that it's reasonable to take an athlete who has already committed to the school and put them in peril because you want to add someone else. And it's easy for me to say that from my ivory tower and not facing the pressure that coaches do to win each year. But I also think there's a lot of teams that still have roster spots, that still have the availability where, these athletes can go to and they're able to play, pending, of course, the transfer restrictions, which, again, the NCAA could very easily fix on their own if they wanted to. Just open a new transfer portal window for these players, read the tea leaves again, but they have very clearly stuck their hand. They've clearly dug into the box here, and for better or for worse, that does not seem like it's going to be happening.
For the record, I'm not cutting him forever. He wasn't going to play this year. So he's going to be back next year.
A soft redshirt year is what you're saying.
And we can make him a manager so he can still be around the team the entire time.
Didn't they change the rule? Didn't they change the rule where you can't have managers, join the team anymore? No.
Do rules count, Sam?
Yeah.
I don't know. Everything I heard Joe say, I absolutely heard this was John Chaney doing an inside job, turning on his own teammate and making sure that this kid could be, we don't count. He doesn't count against the roster cap. He can't play this year. So that's what I heard Joe say.
No, not cutthroat. Strategic.
Man. Well, we'll talk antitrust laws again soon. I'm sure that does it for this episode of Unilateral Decisions. The team will be back next week without me, hopefully with a VIP guest. So we look forward to watching that. But thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.